Hello and welcome to our latest episode of the University of Worcester Study Skills Podcast. I'm Kate Courage from Library Services, and also from the library I'm joined by
Sykes.
And from the Centre for Academic English and Skills,
Christina, Wright.
Kieron, Dann.
And our guest speaker today is...
I'm Helen. I'm the Deputy Head of School for Sport and Exercise Science, but in my other life I work on academic integrity for the university, and I'm sort of fronting generative AI and artificial intelligence at the moment.
Wonderful, so thank you for joining us. And today we're going to talk about generative AI. So I think I might start off by defining what we mean by that in today's discussion. So Helen, what do we mean by AI today?
So generative AI is essentially, if you think about it, as a really big computer, lots of databases, and it's a computer model that's been trained on all these databases. So for some it's quite recent databases, and for others it's a little bit older. And what it does, it draws information from all those databases and it gives you a response. It's very much predictive, it's no empathy, it's no emotion, it's really listening to the prompts that you give it and then responding in a way that lots of other databases have suggested that it responds. So that's why they call it a large language model. So a big database drawing lots of information to give you a response in the area that you're looking for.
Lovely. What are the main benefits of AI for our students?
I think in terms of the main benefits, I see generative AI as being part of a toolbox. So when students come to university, they might have some tools in their toolbox already, and what they need to do is fill it with different tools. So for example, how to reference and learning that would be one tool, how to write academically would be another tool. What sometimes students struggle with is starting points for pieces of work, brainstorming ideas, fact-checking, and therefore generative AI can be used to help in all those different ways in terms of doing that. So my main use of AI is generally for brainstorming ideas with myself, whether it's for learning or teaching or on topics, or even organising a badminton tournament.
Yeah.
So I use generative AI, in particular I use ChatGPT-4 to help me make a starting point on all those things. And I think that's how students could use it. So it's a way for me of enhancing their academic learning experience, but certainly not replacing it.
So it's a tool of the initial stages of writing. That's really a benefit. Planning. It can help you plan. It can give you some ideas about what you might want to focus upon, and of course you just look at that critically and whether you want to agree with those or not, or disregard them. It could also be a good learning aid for looking at your language, a little bit of proofreading, looking at vocabulary, the use of vocabulary and sentence structure as well. But as Helen said, we've got to be very, very careful that we are in control of AI and it's not in control of us. So what that means is that we are using it to help us. We are using it, we are controlling it to help us, and we're not allowing it to do too much, because that's where it can produce problems.
So we can use it in class to help students build their critical analytical skills. So they can develop their skills further. We can use what's produced to critically analyse, for critical analysis.
I think what I love about AI is that there are lots of different tools available that can be used in so many different ways. In fact, in some ways, like everything now, there's almost too much information. I really love the art AI tools because I'm not very good at drawing, but I might have a good imagination in terms of words. So this idea of changing text into art to help me enhance, certainly if I was secondary or primary teaching, sometimes that view there might be reading a book such as the Gruffalo, they put the text in, it can produce a picture of the Gruffalo as described by Julia Donaldson, and how amazing is that? So I think there's some really powerful things with art it can do. Yeah. The other thing which I think it's great for is maybe changing the tone of how people are writing in different ways. So as a student, maybe starting to understand about when an academic might give some feedback, said, you need to improve the formality of your text, but what does that look like? Have they got time? If they haven't gone for an appointment at the Centre for Academic English and Skills, which I would recommend, actually they can use different types of AI to look at the tone of what they work, formalise it, see some examples, so that they can then use that in the rest of their work. So that for me would enhance the learning experience.
I think it is that thing, isn't it, of, as everyone was saying, about making sure that you're enhancing learning or not outsourcing learning. So I've had conversations about this with people recently for other institutions, and examples being that if you are, supposing you're revising for an exam, and if you put your lecture notes into an AI tool and ask it to generate your revision notes, you're outsourcing learning, because that process of creating your revision notes is a learning process. Whereas if you do that yourself, you get the learning and then you ask AI to generate, say, a multiple choice quiz to test your learning, and that's a brilliant use of the tool, because you've done the learning, it's then allowing you to check really efficiently what you've learned. So.
Absolutely right, and the example that Helen gave is a good one. So if you're trying to enhance your academic style, you put in what might be seen as relatively informal style of writing, ask it to come up with something better. It's not then just a matter of cutting and pasting and putting that into your essay. You need to use that as a learning tool. Understand, well, why is that better? Why is that more formal than what I did previously? And if you can understand that, it really helps you gain knowledge in this area of academic writing and academic style. Then that's great. Then it's helping. It's an aid, and that's what it can be good for.
So that idea starting process. So is I use ChatGPT, for example, to help me to plan a pirate party for 7-year-olds, and it produced a whole load of ideas. But if I'd used them wholesale, I'd have had children walking off a plank in a rather dangerous manner, and I couldn't have done that. And some of the ideas just weren't interesting, and the kids would have got very, very bored. But actually there were some ideas there. I might have found them a different way. I might have just searched Google for it, and I probably still would have come up with some good ideas. But it was quite good for just giving me some really quick ideas that I could go yes, 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 no.
So that's where you have to critically
you
reflect.
You have to critically reflect. But it doesn't have to be some really complicated academic thing, is it? It's just knowing what you're doing. I knew what was going to work for my 7-year-olds. You begin to get a feel of what your academic writing might be look like, but you need to use that in the context of the stuff that you're reading as well. Does it match the kind of things that I'm reading?
And therefore, actually, a new future key skill is being able to look and assess what AI might have generated for you, and be able to pick out, well, actually, is this relevant to my subject? Is it valid in that, is it real? Because we do know that AI can hallucinate. That's becoming less and less, but it will make things up. And we have to have some background knowledge in order to enhance our learning experience. You can't just take it verbatim. And we would say that about any journal article. You don't just necessarily believe what the author or the writer is saying. You look at the research, you interrogate the research. And generative AI is no different. You have to interrogate and look and check that it's correct. We had some members of staff created, they wanted a photo of, it was essentially a girl looking towards a quite gloomy house in the rain with an umbrella. Now, when you look at the photo initially, it looks great, but then you go, what is wrong with this picture? And what it was is that the girl wasn't holding the umbrella, but she did have it above her head, but wasn't actually holding it. So I think that's, when you look at it initially, it looks great. But then when you look under the surface, you go, oh, right, there needs to be someone holding the umbrella. There's something fundamentally wrong with that picture. So if you didn't look at it and look under that surface and use your own knowledge, then that's where things are going to go wrong. When you've not got that critical eye, whether it's a written piece of work or whether it's a PowerPoint presentation and some images with that, you have to have that critical eye. And that's why it's something that can only enhance but not replace the learning experience, because you have to use your own skills and develop those skills.
Can I ask how up to date is the data of the databases? Because is there sort of like does it lag? Is there a gap between what's happening in the world and?
Yeah, I mean, it is generating very quickly. So this week, Elon Musk sent out Grok. So that's kind of rival to ChatGPT 4. Okay, and they made some claims that actually, Elon made some claims that it was as good, but they found that it wasn't. But he said it's more humorous. I'm not sure how AI can have a sense of humour, but he said it was more humorous in terms of some of its responses and what it would do. But ChatGPT 4 will draw a little bit from the internet, and it's trained up until September 2022 on most databases. Well, if you're looking at ChatGPT, the free version 3.5, you're going back to kind of September 2021. So it's much older. And actually, ChatGPT isn't really good for writing an academic piece of work. I think that sometimes academics and students think that you put something into ChatGPT and it's immediately going to produce a piece of work for you. You will have to work a lot harder than that, and what you will find is, in particular with the free version, a lot of the references are very dated or they don't exist. Or you certainly can't find them. The other thing is it can't get beyond paywalls, and a lot of academic research is behind a paywall. So it's not going to be able to access those. So if you're going to get the best marks on a piece of work, you need to be accessing library services, in preference to Google Scholar, to get the most up-to-date academic pieces of work. For sure.
That's where it can also be a very good learning tool in the classroom. So what I've done previously is ask ChatGPT to come up with some sample essays from certain questions, and then my students go through it and basically evaluate to what level that is. So it's all about sort of critically evaluating and critical thinking, which is so important in higher education now. And they can very easily see the limitations of what it can do. So some of those, it's that the references are very basic, or they don't actually give much information or support the ideas that well. It's a very generic piece of work. It doesn't go into depth the way that your tutor would want you to. So just to actually analyse it is very what ChatGPT can do, for example, is very good critical thinking practice. And anybody can actually do that. It's very important to know its limitations and if you're going to use it at all.
I think one of the things that we have to consider, both as academics, for professional services and for students, is that Gen AI has already been integrated in lots of different ways in the workforce. And therefore I read a report this week from Kingston University, which I thought was brilliant, which talked about future skills and what future skills might look like in a world of generative AI. And there's some things that can never be replaced, which is, for example, working with people. And quite a lot of the professions within the University of Worcester are people-orientated professions, and I don't see robot teachers coming anytime soon and being able to do that and maybe manage behaviour in the classroom, for example. I think that'll struggle. But I think the things that you're talking about, Kieron, in terms of problem solving, critical thinking, leadership of different areas, I think these are certainly what Kingston University came out as being some of the top skills that we'll need in 2025. So I think we really need to understand that we need to future skill our students to be able to be critical of generative AI, but also to be able to use it effectively as that tool in the toolbox, because employers will certainly be wanting to look at, because what are employers doing? Ultimately, they're trying to make money. And make money often comes down to time efficiency and effectiveness, and sometimes idea generation. So therefore, they're going to be wanting our students in the future to be able to use generative AI as a way of saving some time, maybe in some of the mundane tasks that we do, but also in some ideas as well. And I see it in certainly our workforces, which are under a lot of pressure, that AI will be a bit of a game changer, actually. And I think they say that I listened to some Deputy Vice Chancellor talks about generative AI, and they talked about it being the fourth industrial revolution and that it would be a game changer, but in particular in health and education, which are currently our most challenging workforces to recruit to, something that we do within the University of Worcester really well, but also those workforces that are under pressure. So this could really be a game changer to help support those people in those professions.
So we have a number of students who are very nervous about using AI. And given what you've just said about it being key for our students and their future careers, how can we support those students effectively?
I'm wondering whether we could point them to an acronym we've come up with in the library to help students approach AI, particularly in the context of assignments, but actually beyond that as well. And we've come up with Take Care. So the C stands for criticise or challenge. As we said before, you've got to be able to look at the information that's coming out of AI critically, think what's useful, what isn't, pick and choose what's going to help you. The A is for acknowledge, so any use of AI needs to be acknowledged, whether you're a tutor or a student. You need to be transparent about the fact that you're using it and how you're using it. The R is for record your search processes, because regardless of how you're finding information for an assignment, it's really important to be able to log that, record it, so you can show how you've got to where you've reached. So recording how you use AI alongside other tools. And then the E finally is expand your research, because AI is typically going to be a good starting point. So for example, you could put a few keywords, like rather suggestions for keywords into AI. It'll generate you some lovely examples that you can try in the different search tools. And generative AI might give you some really interesting starting off points, but if you stop there, as Helen's already said, you're missing all the academic information that's behind paywalls. You are not developing your own writing skills and your own learning, so you've got to see AI as a starting off point. And I think, for students who are either very, very enthusiastic about AI and think it's the answer, or students who are terrified of it, if you follow the Take Care principle, it treads a nice middle line where you're going to be quite safe and engaging with it positively, but making sure that you're being critical and effective.
That you're being transparent about its use.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it comes down to what we've talked about previously, about good academic practice, and generative AI can be part of that good academic practice. And good academic practice, and probably Kieron and Christina would help a lot more with this, is about preparing and planning your work and reading for your work. And generative AI does not replace that process. It can be part and parcel of it, but actually a student is going to get a good grade on something if they can actually demonstrate how they planned and prepared and read for their work. And if it comes to looking at it in terms of academic integrity, the first question we often ask in a meeting of a student is, tell us how you came about your work. And I'd really like students to start being able to really demonstrate that process. Well, I started off and I planned it here. This is a draft of my plan, and they hand it over. Or they go, this is the search history. You can see where I searched on library services. This is where I've got all my Zotero and all my references, so I've got the evidence. And I would really want to have that start to be integrated in. And then, of course, and this is where I use generative AI to help me with some ideas for that planning. So really acknowledge that good academic practice. And I think if you're able to do that and you're able to respond to questions about the content of your work, because you've genuinely read, then I don't think anyone has anything to worry about. But if you've used generative AI to replace that content, you haven't engaged with the reading, then you come into one of those meetings and it's really obvious that you don't know. For example, a student used the word metacognition in a presentation earlier on this week with me. And so immediately when I got to ask the question, my first question was, what is metacognition? And of course the answer was not there because they hadn't interrogated what had been produced. Now, ChatGPT was allowed to be used within this piece of work, but I expected some critical analysis. So where that work had been not transformed, then, it was quite clear. So, you're not going to use that word unless you really know about it. And then that's where students will come unstuck, I think.
Certainly the beginning of the whole process of writing an essay is the planning part of it. Understand the title fully and then brainstorm. and you brainstorm ideas as well as you can. And there's nothing wrong with coming up to using ChatGPT or something just to expand that brainstorm. It might come up with the same ideas that you had, and that's fine. But there might be more. And yes, look at those critically, cross the ones out that you're not interested in following, but it can enhance the content, give you some ideas. And that, once again, is where it's very, very useful. But be honest with what you're using it for. That's really important. And don't be tempted when you start allowing it to produce text for you. Don't be tempted to just perhaps cut and paste some of those ideas and put them into your essay. We can tell. It's quite easy to identify what's been taken from, whether it be a book or whether it be from AI. It's easy for tutors to be able to distinguish a different writing style within paragraphs. So use it to its benefit, be careful, but don't be tempted into allowing it to do too much of your own work for you.
No, I agree, absolutely. It's your voice that's important, and you know, at the end of the day, you're here to develop your learning skills, your critical skills, and you know, you're doing yourself a disservice if you are just pasting from ChatGPT or other tools.
I think the other side to look at in terms of your own personal use of data is to understand that the regulation around the generative AI industry isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
So the EU introduced some regulation last week to try and moderate what's going on, but if you are inputting anything into ChatGPT or Bard or any of these other AI apps, then that data will be used. You can switch some settings off here and there, but essentially, once you've put that information in, it will be used. And I think everyone needs to understand that, in particular in industries such as nursing, midwifery, physio. Don't be using case notes and names of patients, etc. It wouldn't be a good idea.
There's a question mark, isn't there, about what happens when you put published work in where you don't own the copyright as well. And some tools do say that they don't store that information, that it's only used, for example, summarising tools where you could put a PDF in and it will summarise it for you, and they say we don't store it. But there are other tools offer to do that with no such promises. And I think possibly thinking as well about those positive uses of AI, as you said before, if you're going to use a summarising tool, that in itself is probably not wrong, but you've got to make sure if that turns out to be something that is relevant to your piece of work, that you read it before you use it. So it might help you filter out, mightn't it, some things that are not useful. But for the things that are useful, you've got to make sure you've then read that paper, otherwise you might be...
In the same way that you might read an abstract and then think, oh yes, that might be of interest, I will go and read the full paper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also in the way that if you read an abstract and think, well, I think that might be interesting, but actually I'm struggling to read that, I'm going to read something easier first. So you might use Wikipedia to start you off and go, okay, now I've got the academic terms, I'll go and read the more difficult thing. But you could possibly use some AI tools in that way, just to help you do that very basic.
Yeah.
I've got to grips with the concept bit now, I'll try the more difficult academic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how you might use it for reading. We've talked quite a bit about planning. And Kate, you were mentioning a little bit about how you might use it for finding sources. Did you want to say any more on that?
Well, I think one of the issues we've had in the library, I think, in terms of AI that can be used to find sources, is that the ones that tend to be even halfway decent very quickly put up a paywall, don't they? So they very quickly become paid for. So actually, I think for me, there is a bigger question which is around AI and digital inequality. And do we expect students, for example, we know that you're going to get a better experience with GPT-4 than with ChatGPT 3.5 because it's paid for. We know there are search tools that will do a reasonable job of literature searching for you. Again, you'll be very critical, and they're probably not finding all that great quality stuff that you've paid for as a university student, because that's sitting behind paywalls in the library. But yeah, I think there is an issue, isn't there, around how much do we want students to pay for things, because there's a real difference in terms of quality of tool and quality of output.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, well, also just students shouldn't forget what support there is out there at the university. Physical support. So there are tutors around. The Centre for Academic English and Skills you can make appointments to speak to one of us about a particular assignment. So when you speak to someone face to face, or even correspond with them via email, you can do that, and all of that is free. You don't really need to be opting very often for a lot of paid services, which are already free and supplied by the university.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Ask a Librarian service, the live chat you can get. I think possibly we've realised some students actually realise these are people. So you're not getting an AI chatbot. You're actually getting better than that. You're getting a person who will sit and chat to you about your searches and your approach to literature search and give you some really good tips.
So one of the things I sometimes find quite challenging when I'm supporting a student via live chat is that they should know their subject quite a bit better than I do. I might not be an expert in the thing that they're an expert on, but they might be finding it quite difficult to start articulating what that topic is and the different ways in which you could describe the subject. So I think one of the things that AI can help in that conversation between me and the student thinking about their work is in producing a list of maybe alternative terms, some synonyms that can help me understand the subject, but then can be used to develop a search for sources. So the student will be able to say, critically analyse the list of sources, the list of terms that we come up with, and say which ones are right and are relevant and which ones have nothing to do with their subject. I won't be able to do that. I'm not that subject expert. We can both use some AI tools in that process to help us with that communication. So I think that could be useful for searching for sources, can't it? That generating a range of different keywords that we might use.
I think any of the free tools that are out there, they're not very good at finding and sourcing academic resources for you. So my simple thought would be, don't try to do that, and use, like you said, the library services. We pay for tools that go behind the paywall, and therefore they are the best resources that we can get. And I've been using generative AI with my students for an assessment, and that's been their immediate frustration, where they had to get generative AI to produce 8 sources for them. Remember, they're using the free version, and then they had to find some better ones for themselves. So they had to have at least 16 resources, and some of them came to me and said, it doesn't matter what I do, everything it produces is fake. So they quickly realised that actually ChatGPT 3.5 in particular is not good for academic sources, and that was, therefore they knew that their own reading was going to be the source, and that was kind of the lesson that I wanted to teach them, and they learnt it very, very well. I think, Kate, to pick up on the digital inequality, I think this is a genuine concern for all of us at the university, and because if we think back to November 2022, this is when generative AI first started, and we've come a long way in a year. And I think one thing we would love to do as a university is pinpoint an app that we could all use and we could all access that really enhances everyone's learning experience. I think right now it would be really difficult to pick what that was, because they all have their issues. So ChatGPT 4 might feel like it's the right one right now, but ChatGPT 5 is the future and should be coming out fairly soon, and therefore, whatever we purchase, will it then be behind the times? So I think we're going to have to work really hard on first of all educating students and staff on free tools, which are still quite sophisticated, and then secondly, is there anything that we can use as students and staff that we can then pay for, which will really support all of us in what we do? And that's certainly, as a university, what we'll be looking to do.
And maybe that message, I think we've said it, but maybe just to reiterate, is that the paid for versions of things like GPT-4 are going to be better than the free tools at, not hallucinating completely fake references, which will get you immediately into trouble, but you are still missing, they still can't get at that content that you pay your tuition fees to a university for the library online resources to get to. You still are missing out, aren't you, regardless of how much money you pay. You are still actually not getting to the content that you really want to include in your assignments.
I mean, looking from an academic point of view, the bottom line is you need to do the academic reading and finding the sources in order to get the best grades. And generative AI will not change that. And if you don't use it properly within your work, when we read those essays and when Centre for Academic English and Skills read drafts, it is quite easy to spot. Turnitin isn't going to spot it, but actually the voice which AI uses to generate work and the use, often what we see if people have used ChatGPT, for example, is that the level of the work produced isn't the level that they're at. So, for example, for a level 4 student, it might talk about topics that are actually not there until level 6. It's not been covered within the course content, and yet it will talk about it because it doesn't know a level. ChatGPT doesn't know a level.
It's a robot. Yeah.
It's a robot. It's no empathy, it's no understanding of that. And you could say, Wright as a level 4 UK student, but it will still struggle to find that level. And I think the other thing to say is that it's ableist, it's racist, it's sexist, it's all of those things because it's created from databases which have been created from developed countries, and it has Western perspective. So actually, that's why some of the things that you're going to get from it aren't appropriate, and you have to be able to check that, and that's part of the sense checking for it. And until we get some more Eastern influence, I think you'll find that a lot of these generative AI, they're very American. Very, very American, because that is the dominant database from which it's been produced.
I'm conscious how little time we've got left, but I wonder whether maybe it's just worth mentioning. You mentioned Turnitin. I wonder if it's just worth having a word of warning for that actually a very low score on Turnitin can be a bad sign, can't it? Because of course Turnitin doesn't spot AI, so I think as a student it's easy to think, the lower the better on my Turnitin score, but actually it can be quite concerning, can't it? If it's incredibly low percentage, that can be a sign that people have generated that work rather than written it themselves, drawing on academic sources which Turnitin would recognise.
Yeah, ultimately academic staff are trained to do content-led marking. And actually using some of these amazing tools that you've got in terms of Grammarly and Quillbot and all the ones that we're concerned about students using, which will improve the formality and the academicness of the writing, that doesn't take away from the fact that you have to have the content in there. So it can be beautifully written. I once read a psychology essay which was beautifully written. Problem was the content was awful. I didn't know that. I was like, this is A, because it's beautifully written, and then the actual specialist tutor went, they're talking a lot of rubbish. So actually, it doesn't matter how wonderful your work reads, you have to have the content in there, and it needs to make sense for the module and the content that has been taught.
I just thought, would you say, bearing that in mind, it's better at sort of fiction, producing fiction?
Yeah, I think it's great at writing poems.
Yeah.
It sometimes makes stuff up about that as well, though. But it's great for fiction. It's great for ideas. It's great for formalising your writing. It's great for organising my badminton tournament or quizzes. It's brilliant at quizzes and revision quizzes. It's great at all that stuff. But academic, critical, problem solving, working with people, it is not.
And you miss out, don't you? Because forget whether you're going to get caught or not. If you haven't done the reading, it could be the reading that's really exciting, that creates transformation in your own lives and gives you the potential to transform other people's lives, because you're just, you're bringing together all that knowledge that's out there and interpreting it in your own way, and therefore that empowers you to make a contribution in the world, and that's exciting. That's what education is all about.
It's the value of a degree, isn't it? Having to teach you to think.
Yeah. Being able to make a difference in the world, and that's what we're trying to do. So there aren't really shortcuts to that, sadly.
No, I think as academics, what we need to really consider is what are we trying to test within our assessments, and realising that actually if we want to just test at a surface level, then generative AI will be very good at responding to those questions that are at surface level. But if we really want to demonstrate our students' learning, then those assessments need to be authentic. They need to allow for much deeper problem solving and critical thinking. And we need to reflect on, as academics, what is most important to future skill these students. And I think surface level essays is probably not the best way. I think at University of Worcester we're very well set up, and a lot of our courses are very vocationally based and have authentic learning experiences as part of this, and I think that's really important, which is why our graduates are employable and are very good at applying that knowledge. But I think for some of our other assessments we have to really recognise whether are they useful at all.
Yeah.
Absolutely.